welcome back, guys. So today I want to introduce you to a new series which I've been working on for quite a while, and this would be, of course, working with Rust to build a lot of amazing applications, and most of them, of course, are gonna be like real life applications, not just like some to do whatever app. No, would work on like real applications, and I can already maybe even give you tip of the iceberg to kind of like show you what's is planned. So I have prepared a project where I would work on Rust for distributed systems. I have one also strictly for IoT systems, and then we have, of course, like as a backend server, and we also use Rust for serverless functions for different cloud providers. Specifically, we would do it. We use it for the AWS cloud, and of course, the Azure cloud, and we'll use Rust again for a GUI application, and in the end, would also use it for a CLI application. So these are some of the projects we will work on by the end of this series for now. So trust me, this list is probably gonna grow along the line as we move, but it will never get shorter than this. Anyway, so first things first. So Rust, I am guessing you already have heard about Rust. I'm just gonna assume you have. And But why Rust? I mean, Rust has been like the most loved language for a couple of years now, and most people will not even attribute to Rust as being a new language anymore, because of the adoption rate more or less. And but of course, without me telling you all of this, so it doesn't like sound like my personal opinion, what I might of course maybe also do is just show you like the 2024 Stack Overflow um surveyor results, which they published like a couple of days back. And maybe I just put this guy over here, and I hope you can see it. And so these are some of the results, but I'm guessing most of this, we can't explore all of this in this call right now, but I'm just going to go ahead to the interesting parts, and that would be most popular technologies. So we'll move just down here, and I'm just going to scroll down to the one that would be interesting to us. Um, one few more seconds, and we should be there. So right here. So you can see this year again, I think for the last couple of years, Rust has been and maintains to be the most admired and desired language, as you can see over here. And I'm just also probably just going to share a link with you in this, leave a link in the description so you can again read up on a little bit about Rust. But Rust is pretty loved language for now, and can also of course be or has been used in different diverse fields, more or less. There are a lot of big announcements regarding where Rust will be introduced, like the Linux kernel, for example, and a lot of exciting news actually. So I really think that Rust should be one language that you should put in your bucket list at a list of things you would need to learn in case you haven't already. Yeah, so regarding Actis, so would you use Actis when would work on our backend server? So the question was between Actis and Exum, and personally, again, I stand to be corrected. I think like in app real world applications, I don't think, even if there are difference between both, let's say in terms of speed or whatever, I think they don't, they're probably going to be negligible. I mean, a lot of people try to talking about Exxon being like an offshoot more or less of say Tokyo, but I really don't think that's going to be a lot of issue here. Also, there is this thread on Reddit. I will also maybe leave a link so you can read through it, where people are constantly fighting over, oh, which is better, Actis or Exum. It doesn't really matter for us in the end. The underlying language still remains Rust, and but of course it doesn't hurt to maybe learn Exum if you find it interesting. Anyways, doesn't really matter. But anyways, we would use Actis for our backend technologies. So for our backend server, we would use it so you can. I will also maybe show you a little bit around, and we can use it to do almost every possible thing we did in our last series working with Go and even more. And again, I would probably, if you require it, to also do some series of just working with Exam, so you can again maybe read through both, compare both, and decide what you want to go with in the end. Anyways, for now, we'll be sticking with Axis. Okay, so there are of course a lot of prerequisites you would need to do, because I really think it makes a lot of sense that you more or less follow this tutorial hands-on, so you don't just watch it through more or less like you would binge a Netflix movie or whatever, but actually to work along. And I will also share lots and lots of resources, learning resources on the internet. With Rust, there are tons and tons of them, and I will provide all I can find, so you could have a lot of resources to, doesn't matter if you're just starting new or you're already working with Rust and you would want to maybe clarify or deepen your knowledge, doesn't really matter. I'll provide the link so you can just have it handy more or less in case you need it. That's just the point. So of course these parts are not that's hard if you ask me, but some of the things you would need to do, of course, to follow along would be to install Rust and then Cargo. Cargo is like the package manager for Rust. And of course, I'm guessing you would have an IDE, and then of course, we would just jump right in and set up our project. So what we'll do right now is to just jump right in, set up our project, and then we will proceed from there. That's really what we're gonna do. We don't have so much time to waste. So what we'll do right now is to sorry, talk a little bit about actors and features. Actors, of course, being the bedrock of what powers Actix Web, and based, of course, this is based on the actor model. And again, if this is new to you, I will do a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll proceed to our simple Hello World application, and then we handle simple requests and responses, and then we look at path and parameter, and of course, query parameters. And so that's more or less what we'll cover in this tutorial. And then I've also I've also gone ahead to modify some of the other topics to cover some of the things we'd like to cover in this series. And of course, along as we proceed, again, like I said, this list probably would go, and then depending on the content of this topic, we might need to cover some additional things on the advanced topics, just as we go on the fly. So anyway, without further ado, let's really jump right in and start building something. So what I would just do is to come to the terminal and just do cargo init, because I'm already within this folder. But if we want to create this in a new folder, I would use the new command. So we just hit enter, and then this should start to create some boilerplate more or less for us. And then we can simply do cargo run, and then it's just going to run this simple main.rs file in here and just print hello world, as you can see over here. So what we'll do now more or less is to go ahead and start setting up our project. So like I said, we'll be working with Actix. So there's been a lot of changes, of course, that's already happened to Actix Web. So if you read through the documentation, it will also tell you that the usefulness more or less of actors model as it pertains to Actix Web is currently diminishing, or has been diminishing, because of the maturity of the features and async wait ecosystems, and because this would more or less be the future. So but Actix is currently still being used on the Actix Web, mostly for WebSocket endpoints. And if you do not know about actors model, I will also show you a little bit of so this more or less, that's so maybe you also begin to understand um, why async future would more or less monthly gets popular and popular within Actix Web as it matures. So the whole point, of course, as you can see over here, is concurrency. So if this can already be achieved with async await, then that's also why it's currently been has been diminishing more or less within the Actix Web ecosystem. Anyways, I will also sorry, I will leave a link to this article, Wikipedia article, so you can also read it up a little bit if you want to know about actors model. But if you, from what you can already see here, the basic thing I would want you to take out of this is about concurrency computation, where you have separate concurrent um, units, more or less referred to as actors, as you can see, working completely independent of the next one. And so if you read through here, so they can modify their own private states, but can also affect each other indirectly through messaging. So again, I'll leave a link to this so you can read it up on your own spare time. Anyways, so what I would like us to do now is to come in here and start making changes to what we already have here. So to get started, all I need to do is, of course, I need to add Actix Web in here, Actix Web. as a dependency, I'll take the latest version. This should be version 4, should be 4.3, but let's just focus on the 4, just leave it as 4 for now. And what I will also then will come in here, and I'm just going to copy the boilerplate example that you will see on the Actix Web page when you visit the page, and then just paste that in here. And that's pretty straightforward. So let's give it a couple of minutes, the Rust Analyzer, and then we can continue. Okay, now our installation is done. And then let's copy the last part of the sample code and bring it down here because we need a main function, and then that's it. So I can quickly walk you through what we have in here. So this is like the sample boilerplate you can just copy from the Actix Web page and from the web browser. And so more or less we use the Actix Web that we've imported. So this, sorry, these are just the methods, get and post, and then of course the response server and responder more or less. And so what we did here is to basically define a couple of endpoints, and then we set up our main function, of course annotated with Actix main, and then we instantiate our server this way, and then we attach these different endpoints as services more or less. So you can also see in here that we can define our routes this way, or we can also define them this way. And we can, of course, we also have the option to group these endpoints together if we wanted to, but of course I'll show you that in a bit. So anyways, we can try to run our app to see what we get. So cargo run, let's see what we get. So our server should be up, and maybe I'll open a new tab and so we can test this out. So I can go to curl localhost 8080, and then maybe I go to hey. Okay, I think I always forget that I'm on Windows, and anyways, I have to prepend this more or less with HTTP. Has to be like this, localhost. And now you see we get, of course, a 200 status code. And then well, if you look here, we are simply returning a string in the body. And that's also what we have here, hey there. And of course, we can visit this other endpoint if we wanted. So again, we can go to the root, and we should also get a status 200. And we can also go to, 880. And we can also go to echo, um, echo. And we get an error. Of course, this should be a post, as you can see over here. So echo is a post, and then it's at this endpoint. But anyways, that's quite pretty straightforward. And so the first thing I would like to, maybe I'll just collapse our terminal. The first thing I would want to show you is sorry, is how we can work with our endpoints. So just imagine, again, I'm going to leave this as simple as this for now. We would make modifications to this as we proceed. But again, just think of this as simple endpoint where you simply provide the method and then the path, as simple as this. And again, you have down here services. So with services, what we can actually do would be to scope our endpoints, and I'll show you what I mean in a bit. So let's just say that we have, maybe I create one, I just copy this, and we'll organize our code as we proceed anyways. So I can call this, let's say, login, for example, and I call this logout. And this would be at /login, and this would be at, again, don't mind the methods for now, and of course we can maybe mind it. So we leave log out as a get, and maybe make login a post. Sorry. So we can actually, so if all these belong together, for example, we could maybe say they belong to the same scope, say auth. What we can simply actually do would be to just come in here where we've defined our server. And then what we can do is, so within service, for example, what we can actually do is to come in here within service, and then we add a scope. So web dot scope. Why do I get? don't I have this imported? I think I do. Yes, I do. And then so within this scope, what I can actually do is to now provide a path. So the path could be, let's say, auth, for example. And then what I can actually do is, let me make this clearer this way. So I put this on one line so we can actually see what I'm doing. So I'll call this, I will scope this as path like this, as auth, so auth being how we want to group all of this together. And then within this service, I can, of course, now create a new service to add the endpoints now I would want to have, for example. So in here, I can now add these other separate endpoints that we've defined for the auth. So maybe I also put this in one line so it's maybe a lot easier to read. And because now it's cluttering the whole place actually. So and then I bring this down here. So now what we can do within here now will be to define those separate services. And in here I can simply add my login. And again, I can also add logouts, the second one, for example. So now what we get more or less is we have a grouping whereby for the auth endpoints, we have a simple /auth and then /login or /logout. So if we restart our server, for example, I can stop this for a minute and then restart it, cargo run. And what this means now is we should be able to go to localhost /auth and then /login. Not found. Yeah, of course, because if you look over here, our login is still a post. So, but anyways, let's go to logout then. And then we should still be fine, as you can see over here. So again, this is still very ugly, dirty code, but it doesn't make sense for me to just dump everything on you. I want us to progress in steps so you see why things are the way they are, and we'll modify things along the line as we go. Anyway, so let's continue. It's pretty straightforward. We're just gonna play around a lot, and but I'll try to introduce you to a lot of things as I can in this simple series. I think Actix is pretty straightforward to work with. Anyways, so let's continue. So let's just say for logout, for example, again, we are just playing around here. Let's say we wanted to add additional, let's say, path parameter, for example, and it's pretty straightforward. So we can simply come to the path here and then add an argument. This way you can actually call it name, for example. And then what it means is that this function would receive this name as an argument, more or less. So what we can now simply do is come inside n, we'll pass that argument. It should be a path param. So what we have to do is we define it this way, and then we define what that name should be. And in our case, it should be a simple string. Pretty straightforward. That's all we have to do. And then in here, what we can simply do is maybe instead of printing this here, we use a format, for example, because I would like us to show the user what actually happened. So we can now do something like hello, and we provide the name, and you have been logged out, something like this. And then in here, we can simply just pass name like this, pretty straightforward. So now if we restart the server one more time, and visit this endpoint again. Let's give it a yes. So now it's done, and then we visit logouts. Now of course we have to. Sorry, my bad. I have to provide name. I can say Tony, and now we get this here. It's pretty. That's just all you really need to know when it comes to working with path parameters. It's really straightforward. Trust me. And of course we can again, there are a lot of, so now we're just going to play around really with these two endpoints we have for here, and then when we get tired, then we'll now move over to actually starting to structure our code. Okay, so but again, you might ask yourself, for example, so what if we want to like do the normal things you would do, let's say provide an event, like a payload, for example, to this endpoint, or pass, or even as it is, we would want to, let's say, mash out this into a struct or whatever. All of those are actually pretty simple and straightforward to do. But anyways, before we get so much ahead of ourselves here, because again, this is still an introduction, what I would like to do more or less is, I'm really tired of having to restart this server each time I make a new change. I don't know about you, but I don't think it's really cool. So what we can actually do to solve that problem is again pretty straightforward. So we can simply use cargo watch. And so I can simply say cargo watch and I pass X this way and then run. And then what this means is that our server is actually going to run infinitely, and again we get hot reload. So if I make any change in here and I save, you notice that I get a hot reload right away. So that way we don't have to restart our server um, um, anytime we make a small change. And of course, what do you need to do to have this working? Again, pretty simple. I will show you. So what this simply does is it watches over your entire project and just checks for changes within your source file. So if there happens to be any, it recompiles your code and then you get like live, more or less, reload, live hot reload of your application. And then of course it doesn't work out of the box; it has to be installed. And you can, of course, you can install the binary, and you can also install you can simply, sorry, you can actually install using bin install, or you can actually just install from source. And to install from source is actually pretty straightforward. All you need to do is cargo install. I have this already installed, so I don't have to install it again. It's a cargo watch, and that's all you need to do. And then it would of course install this for you so that you can now say cargo watch. So there are of course a lot more other commands you could have to run in the end. Again, I'm going to add the link in the description so you can check it out. But of course, for now, we don't have to restart our server anymore. So what I can now do is actually collapse this for now, and then we focus on what we want to do. So anyways, I want to show you so much like within a short time. It's going to be a lot of information, but again, I indulge you to take your time, pause the video if you need to, come back and rewatch it. So we will be moving pretty fast, just working with these two endpoints in here. That's all we're going to do in this video. So you have like a rough overview. And don't be scared really if you've never worked with Actix. It's pretty straightforward to work with. So let's proceed. So again, still talking about defining our endpoints, more or less our API. So like I told you, it's actually very straightforward. And but going forward, I would like us to just use a get endpoint, something we can simply curl. I don't want us to use any additional tool. Um, so I can maybe copy this. So this is still gonna be under auth. Maybe I'll name this fetch user. I don't know, something like this. And then here would just be maybe user, for example. Again, I'm gonna come down here and add this here. So scope, sorry, service, and then I add this here as our factory, more or less, endpoint. So if we now come over to fetch user, we have a whole new endpoint we can really play around with. So let's just say we wanted to add a couple more arguments to our path. So this whole procedure more or less is referred to as extraction. So this would be what we did here more or less is use a path extractor to extract information from the path URL. So but what happens when we want to add more here? So we have, for example, we have name, and then maybe also I want to provide some ID. So assuming this was actually what we wanted to do. So again, if we want to extract this, is pretty straightforward. Now, what we get in the end is going to be a tuple. So simply just make this a tuple of, let's say this is also a string, for example. So we now have string on string. And then maybe what we can actually call this now would be, maybe I change this from name to now path. And because now is a tuple, is not one single item. And then what we can now do is to come in here, define path, for example, and then this would be path dot into inner. And now, so we, as you can see over here, we get our two arguments. So what we can now do is say hello whatever person, and then we say something like your ID is, and then we pass the second argument. So here what we now need to pass would be path dot zero and path I'll also pass this as reference path.one like this. And that's really it. So if we open our server again, of course, this should do a hot reload for us. And now we visit our endpoint one more time. So we have /Sony / I don't know, some UUID, whatever. And of course, this we oh, I forgot we are now going to a new endpoint, so it's no longer the logout one, so that's also fine. So we need to come in here and change, because it's still, the scope is still off. And now maybe in here we will now have of course user, and then Tony and some UUID. Again, that's also what we get here. It says, hello Tony, your ID is this. You know, so but just thinking about it, you can already imagine that, what if I want to make this longer? So let's just say I'm crazy and I am defining some crazy endpoints, and I have all these things jumbled up in here. So it means that to extract the third one, I have to also come in here and provide the path, and then this list can grow on and on and on, but again, you can already imagine this would not be quite interesting for us, because it will not look clean anymore. So one simple thing we can actually do is to define a struct that's going to define the whole thing for us. So I can maybe come over here and define a new struct, and I can name it whatever. I can say path params. So within here, I provide everything that's sorry, everything we need. So let's just say the first, sorry, let's say the first one is name. Okay, and this name is a string, and then the second one we said was ID. So this ID can be a string or an int, whatever, it doesn't really matter. And then the third one, say email, and then just simple thing like this. Did I type that wrong? I think I did. So let's just assume this represents our new, the argument we would like to pass in here, because now we can see that this is not really sustainable, because this list can really become crazy and grow infinitely. So what I need to do is to use a struct this way. The only important thing, of course, is that this struct would need to at least implement the serialize. So I'm gonna use would have to install serde more or less to help us do this. So the serialize, and this should come from sed.deserialize like this. And of course, we don't have it installed, so we need to install it. Pretty straightforward. So let's just go ahead and do that. So I simply come to cargo toml, and in here, I just need to add sed. So I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Is it serd or serde? I have no idea, but and anyway, so I'm just gonna go for version 1.0, and then I'll just add features. So here I will need to provide derive and save, and now this should be able to, of course, recompile, install our packages for us, and then we should be good to go in a couple of seconds or minutes. So now the installation is done, of course. So now we come back to fetch user, and now we can actually get rid of all of this, and now we simply replace it with our path params like this. And even at this point, it's not even necessary anymore for us um, to do it like we did it before. So there's really no point for us to even do this anymore. So I can simply really get rid of this here. And now here I can simply do path dots. Now the first thing I need is name, for example, and the second thing I need would be ID. And maybe I can, if I want, I can also provide the email. And now your ID is this, and your email is this, as simple as this. And now if we visit this endpoint one more time, so now we need to provide some email. I can say sample at gmail.com, and then we get this back. As you can see over here, we get this back. So as you can already see, this is pretty straightforward. Working with path params in Actix Web is a breeze. It's like one of the simplest things you would actually do. Trust me, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so again, when it comes to let's say query parameters, for example, is also really the same. I'm just going to copy this again, and maybe I say I don't know, I'll just rename this as get user, and then I come in here, and then of course add a new service in here to define this one, and again I call this get user, for example. And then to work with query params, as you can already imagine, all we need to do is come here and change this to query, and really that's it. And now of course we need to clear out this ones because that's no longer necessary. Okay, and now we can simply come over here, and now I can change all of this. So over here now I say I use ampersand, and now I can provide name equal to Tony. I'll remove this one and replace it with ampersand, and now I say ID is equal to this, and I remove the last part again, and now I say email is equal to this. And what did we do wrong? We might have done something wrong. Let's see. So I wipe all of this out again and bring up the last command. So localhost /auth/users. Okay. And then name is this, ID is this, email is this. So what was the error? Character is not allowed. So did we make any mistake in here? So name is this, and ID is this, and email is this. So this is some formatting issues with the PowerShell timeline for me. So maybe actually just open a new one. Maybe I do like a split terminal, and then I need a bash, git bash, and then I get rid of this PowerShell because that's really what's messing this whole thing up. Anyways, we do a call to localhost. Now we don't even need to provide HTTP like in the front. So now go to /user, and now we go again. So name equals to Tony, and ID some UUID, and then of course email would be sample@gmail.com, and then this should be fine. And let me see. So I've gone ahead to actually just just gonna close this off, and I'm currently using the REST client and adding this here because there seems to be a lot of complexity with doing this call on the terminal. Anyway, I've created this REST client, as you can see over here, and when we can simply send our request again, and everything should still work fine. That's totally fine. So sometimes the terminal can actually make you perceive errors where they are not. Anyways, I will close this off again so we have more real estate to work with. So that would be it for query parameters. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward. We only need to provide this over here, and then we should be fine. And of course, if you're already wondering, for example, like regarding, so for example, this one that is a post request, let's say this one, this login here, and you're wondering how we can receive the payload, more or less, again, it's pretty straightforward. So what I can also do is maybe come here, create a new struct. So this is going to represent our user. I can just simply call this, I'm trying to move as fast as possible so we don't lose time. So I can call this user model, and then that's going to be, let's say, pretty straightforward first. So that's going to be a first name and a last name. That's an ID as an email. That's it. And now in this post, let's just as okay, let's maybe I will just keep email and password actually for our login endpoint. I think that's just what we need. And then maybe I call this login module or whatever, or login requests. I think that's more fitting. A login rec like this. And now, of course, what I can actually do is, yeah, I can come in here. Maybe I call this rec this way. Again, this would be web.json. And then, of course, I need to provide the type. The type would be of type login rec like this. And then what we can actually simply do is to come in here and maybe do a print line. And I can simply say your credentials are like this. And then we, of course, we have to implement debug to do this, but yeah. And now I can simply just come in here and throw in debug, so we should be fine. And that's it. So again, we can come over here And now I'm just going to copy all of this. I think this is much actually easier for us to do. So now I go to auth slash login, and then it has to be a post. And now inside here, I provided endpoint. So I think I provided username. What was it? It was just, sorry, email and password actually. So this should be email, and I say example@gmail.com, and then for password we can say, I don't know, it doesn't really matter, put in whatever I want in here, and that will send our request. And I think, let's see, why do we get hello world? Of course, yes, I think the rest would be logged in the terminal. So let's look in here. So that's also what we see here. So your credentials are this, blah, blah, blah. So this and this over here. So that's also fine. So again, pretty straightforward. That's how we can actually pass in our requests this way as a JSON payloads, and then this should of course get through to where we wanted to get to. Anyways, so the next thing we can quickly look at again would be app states. So if we wanted to have a state within our app that we constantly share more or less across our different endpoints. So one way to actually have this shared across would be to use states. So this can actually be things like, let's say, your database connection, for example, or any other data that you would want to share with your endpoints. One simple way to do this would be to use the app state. So again, to do this, we can simply come down here and create a struct. We can call this app state. And then it's gonna, I'll keep it pretty simple for now, so I can maybe provide a simple value that says state, and it's gonna be a string. And what we can actually do is to let sorry, to let any endpoint that consumes this app state to more or less modify this or whatever, or else we simply just log it. It doesn't really matter. That's not the focus for now. And so what we can actually do would be pretty straightforward, would be to just come in here to our server, because again, we need to append this over here so that the endpoints below it will actually inherit from it. Or to make it interesting, what we can actually do, because we would like to modify this so we can also see things change, just to be sure that what we have is actually being modified or whatever from the different endpoints that would inherit from it. So what we can actually do is to wrap this with a mutex, so that way we can mutate it. And then of course we need to, so this should come from here. So that's already nice. And so what we can now simply do is to come down to our server. So before we define our endpoints, for example, and we come in here, and then I can define an app data like this. And so now I need to just pass in the states that we defined initially to have this available to all our endpoints. And maybe what we can actually do is to come over here, and then I can define this data. And so we can actually define it before we pass this around. So we use our web.data this way, because I don't want to do that down there. So web.data.new. And this is actually where we now instantiate more or less our app state. So I will just call this ours was called app state like this. And we need to provide the content more or less. So we had state, and of course we have to be conscious that we are actually wrapping this with a mutex. So we use mutex.new, and now I will provide the string in here. I can also maybe do a string dot new like this, and again just provide, maybe I call this init state, whatever, doesn't really matter, something like this. I need to close this off. And of course I don't have to provide this way. Anyways, I will just get rid of this, it doesn't really matter. So, and I'll just make this to string. And so that we have this instantiated this way. And now I simply come in here and of course pass this in here. So because we are doing a move, what I would actually need to do is to actually clone this. And of course, I have to move this here for give it full ownership more or less of the cloned data, and this should now be fine. So what we can now actually do is to, let's say for these endpoints we have over here, we have to again pass this. If we want them to have access to it, we have to pass it to the endpoints as part of the arguments to those endpoints to have access to them within those endpoints. So now that we have our app states implemented and more or less available for all our endpoints to consume, maybe I indent this way so it looks much nicer. So what we can now simply do would be, for example, to come over to, let's say the login endpoint. So because if you think about this, for each of these endpoints where we have this appended before them, it means for this end, for this each of these endpoints, should they receive any arguments or arguments, as the case might be, the first argument, of course, would be our app state data. So what it means is that we can actually come over to, let's say, to the login and maybe provide this information. So I can call this app data. And of course, this would, let me close this off so we can focus on this. This would be from web data. And then I will need to provide, of course, our app state. And like this. So what it means now is within this function we have access to our app data. So what we can actually do is maybe is to go ahead and modify this, for example. So what I can do is I say let mute state. So states would of course come from our app data dot state, and then we lock it and of course unwrap. So again, I'm leaving you to do the correct error handling here, but I'm just gonna do is unwrap for now. So just to keep it simple. And then what I would like to do more or less is to modify this state. So I can say state. I can now maybe change this to login to say to know that we visited the login endpoint, and then I'll change this to string, and then this should be changed now. And now what we can actually do also, maybe we'll do a print so we actually see what's going on. So I will say the current state is something like this, and here we simply provide our state like this, and that's it. So we are passing this over here as the app data more or less to this endpoint, and this endpoint can actually have access to it, modify it, whatever we need to actually do in here. So if we come in over here, I'm just going to open the terminal so you actually still see it. So remember we made this implementation in our login endpoint. So if you come over here to our login endpoint and visit it again, you can see over here, of course, it returns a 200, and if you look over here, you see that the app state was actually changed. And of course, to verify that this is true, what we can also do is to maybe, let's look over here. So we also have this auth user endpoint. So I'm going to copy this part again and go to this fetch user that we had over here and put it in front this way. So what did I copy? Of course, like this. And I'll just call this again app data. And then I would still do something like this. I just copy and print because I want to see what is currently looking like. So just come over here. Again, I actually don't need to modify this because we just want to see the current state to see if it's actually been mutated from the first login endpoint. Okay, so what we can actually do now is I can come over here and visit this endpoint, this one. Let's check again. So the fetch user endpoint, which happens to be this one. So we can visit it, for example, and we actually don't, so one second, let's verify this. Okay, it seems we've been hitting the wrong endpoint actually. So I think if what we've been visiting is actually this one here, which we defined using query parameters. And anyways, that's also fine. I can just go ahead and create a new one. That doesn't actually take so much effort. So let's come down here and I can maybe call this maybe path params so we can differentiate. So this will be a query params. And now so let's replace this way. So we use a slash. Now we don't actually need to provide all of this because now we're using path params. And then here we replace all of this And then for the last part again, we replace all of this actually, and now this should be fine. So when we restart the server, because we get hot reload and then we visit this endpoint, we see the current app state, the init state, because if you remember in here, we are actually not modifying the state, we're simply just logging the current state. So if I visit this number of times, we get over here, the app state is the init state. But once we visit this login endpoint, it changes it, of course, to the login state. And then if we visit this again a couple of times, now it's our app state is currently logging. So just to, of course, show you that this is what's actually happening under the hood. So that's one quick way we can actually share app state data across our endpoints. Again, this is pretty handy if you want to do things like pass across your connection, like database connection pool, for example, across your endpoints, and whatever your other use cases you could possibly use this for. So that's one way you can actually do that. So to quickly look at form handling, for example, again, it's really pretty straightforward. I'm probably just going to copy this guy again, come down here and paste this. Again, for now, this is just an intro. We are not really doing so much more or less. In our next session, we would actually start pulling things around, just to make sure like we organize things a little bit. But for now, we are really just doing a short intro just to, because the point for me for this video would be to show you how easy it is to actually get started with Actix Web. So I can change this to register, for example. So this would be when we want to register a new user. So I can place this to user, and then now we don't need any path or query parameter anymore. So I can simply call this register like this. So it's going to be at /auth/user/register. So now in here, what we have here, more or less, we don't need this anymore because we don't have any path params that we want to pass over here. But what we can actually do is to change this to JSON. And then in here, we can actually define the payload we want to pass across. So it's actually pretty straightforward. I can come over here, create a new struct, and now I can actually call it user model like this. And then would have, again, I'm just going to add a few things. First name, which would be of type string. Last name, again, which would be of type string. And that's it. That's all we need for our user model. And so what we can actually do is to come over to our register and then just pass it in here. And so again, I can simply, because I don't think we have debug implemented. Do we? I think we do actually. Let's come. So of course we have debug, awesome. So right now, if you want to create a user, you can simply just provide user model more or less without these attributes as a JSON, and then they should go through. That's totally fine. But again, if you wanted to pass like URL encoded form data, pretty straightforward. We change JSON again to form, and that's really all you have to do, as simple as this. And again, you can already see how easy this is. But of course, if we want to provide the option to either work with for this endpoint for you to register, let's say maybe I change this to user so it doesn't confuse us in the end. So if you want to, again, like I was trying to say, provide either a JSON payload or a URL encoded form data, is also pretty straightforward. You don't need to create two endpoints. You can handle the same in the same endpoint here. And what we need to do is simply go to web, I think it should be here, either like this. And now, and now we provide all of this way. And now, so here we can say this is, let me change this, JSON and form. So what we are simply saying here is for this endpoint, so you can provide either a JSON payload of representing a user model or a form payload representing a user. As simple as this. That's really all you need here. Pretty straightforward. Again, I can come in down here and add the service. This would be register like this. And again, we also can again pass our if we want, we can also pass our app state if we need. Of course, in this case, if for example this app state contains like again our database connection string, then it makes sense to pass it over here, and then we can simply put it here. That's also fine. We'll have access to it within this endpoint. As straightforward as that. So you can see here it's really straightforward and easy, in my opinion, to get started with Actix Web. So I think now we have tried to cover most of the basics with working with Actix Web. Again, you can see here all we did was just within this main file here, no new files created, and just with say 95 lines of code, we've covered all the basics like definition of endpoints, starting our server, providing and defining an app state, configuring endpoints, scoping our endpoints, all this we achieved under 95 lines of code, just to tell you how easy it is more or less to get started with Actix. Anyways, that was like a really mouthful introduction in my opinion, but again, this is to get you started. In our next video, we actually now come over here, look at all we've defined over here, and then actually starts to organize our code, put code around, structure our code, and of course our APIs, our handlers, and then we can actually start formatting our code and to make it to start looking as a production grade code. Anyway guys, that was all I wanted to show in this introduction video. I hope it was actually useful for you. This is going to be a really eventful series, again, in my opinion, because of these many projects we've promised to build in this tutorial. It's going to be like a really impactful one because you would have so much to learn in the end. Anyways, that will be all for now, guys. And until next time, guys, I'll see you again in a few days. Again, of course, if you're new to our channel, please go ahead and subscribe because we always strive to provide you quite interesting and resourceful content. So if you're new to the channel, go ahead and subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and you will always be notified each time we release a new video. Anyway, guys, that will be all for now. And until next time, have a lovely evening and bye bye.